I'm not going to get caught on tape mispronouncing this man's name. How do you pronounce your name?
Yalengi Ngemi. Ngemi.
Dr. Yalengi Ngemi.
Yes, sir.
There have been several people up here who've already told you where he's taught, his degrees, and some of the things that he's done. He's a historian, linguist, scientist. He's all of those things. You got to be all of those things to sit up in front of black people and talk. And I mean, you know, because we gonna hold you accountable to everything you say. So it's kind of hard, you know, you go to these universities around here, and you can get up and sit in front of these doctors who yap all day, saying nothing. Doctors of philosophy, doctors of science, doctors of this and doctors of that, but can't tie anything relative to your life. Can't tie anything to what it means to be a human being, what it means to be in this world and come up in a situation that we've been faced with for the last 10,000 years, at least. So this is what's so special about what we're doing here today. If you get anything out of it, it's going to tie to something. You know? So without further ado, well, yield the floor to Dr. Ngemi. For the next 3 days, he's going to be our historian. He's going to be our scholar. He's going to be our minister, our father, so to speak, father of knowledge. And I hope that you all can show him a great, big welcome of applause.
Thank you. I think we are ready to start. I hope everybody have your book, Civilization of Barbarism. Okay, I think everybody had in their packet the outline for what we're going to be doing. Day 1, Friday evening, where it says intensive weekend study series outline.
Yes.
Okay. So Friday evening, the first lecture is we're going to have an introduction and chapter 18 in the book Civilization of Barbarism. And by the way, this is the study guide. I brought a few that maybe on Sunday, those of you who want to purchase one, you'll be able to get one. But this is study guide. But I want us to start with the introduction. As our program says. Now, in terms of introduction, I want to start first because I see they are taping. So people are taping, you might want sometimes to watch me because sometimes I may stand up. Because sometimes to emphasize a point, I don't want to be sitting down. But I want us to look at the introduction in terms of who Sheikh Anta Diop is. I don't know how many of you know of him. Some may have read about him. On the program, we put his picture that we have on the right side. Sheikh Anta Diop, of course, right now, he is an ancestor. Everybody knows what that means? Yes, he's an ancestor now. That means he died for the young people. He passed away. He passed away in 1986. And And he's originally from Senegal, from West Africa. And this is West Africa. Senegal is over here. And the museum, Brother James, that gave me the tour of the museum showed me some pictures of the slave castles out of Senegal, the door of no return and all of that. So Cheikh Anta Diop was born in Senegal. And if you have any questions while I'm speaking, please write it down. So that way when I finish, we can have a discussion together. So Diop was born in Senegal in 1923. And during those days, as you know, Africa was in the hands of Europeans. So Diop, because he came from a very famous rich family, and he was very intelligent, he earned a scholarship to go and study in France during colonial time. Because the French people had a different policy from, let's say, the Belgium or the British. For the French people, for France, their policy was that every country you colonize, you have to make those people become French. So that way you can control their mind, and therefore forever they will be serving you. So therefore France's policy was that they take all the children, male children, not female, not the girls, only the boys. The boys of the chiefs, the children of the chiefs, of the kings throughout Senegal, and they took them to Europe for them to study there. They will stay there for maybe like 10 years, never go back home. Why? Number one, these royal young men, they're going to get a French education. Then because they are young men, then they're going to have French women. So that way we are getting them both intellectually and mentally and physically. So therefore, when they go back, they will never be able to be African, but they will be defending French interests. Why? Because they have now French women. They're thinking French. Their education is French. So in that way, Diop, as many other French-speaking countries, like Damas, who came from Guadeloupe, from the Caribbean island, the islands of the French islands, they did the same thing all over the world. They took these young men to Europe, to France, to give them a European education and make sure that they don't go back home so that they can marry French white women. So in this way, Diop was also taken there with, from his country, a man by the name of Léopold Sédar Senghor. He will become the first president of Senegal at independence. But in this environment, Cheikh Anta Diop was taken to Europe to study. He wanted to study first history and then science. But by doing the research in history, he began to discover certain things that he was never taught in his country. One of the things was that Africa, or pre-colonial black Africa, was not as savage as the Europeans had taught the Africans. So as Diop discovered this, he began to face himself with the challenge of, well, what do I do now? Embrace the European teaching that Africa was savage, or try to defend this information that I'm discovering. All right? Diop, coming from a family that was a very powerful family where people had this self-confidence, pride in who they were as Africans, he decided to fight. He decided that I'm going to do research and teach the truth. And in doing that, he ran into problems, of course, with the academic teachers were teaching him. Why? Because France at that time in the 1920s, in the 1930s and 40s, was teaching that Africa was a savage place. That the Europeans have gone to Africa to civilize Africans. That Africans, we had nothing. We didn't know anything about what is intellectual. That we acted and behaved like animals. But here comes Diop, who wants to defend a different point of view. Therefore, he went into problems. When he wrote his first thesis about Africa having a history before the white people went to Africa, they rejected it. They rejected it. They said, we don't, in other words, you can't get your doctorate degree because your thesis is false. It's wrong. You cannot say that. Okay. So, all right. I'm not going to give up. He changed it now. He wants now to talk about culture. That there was a culture in Africa that you can, one culture in Africa, just like the Europeans have one culture. He said that no, Africa, though they may have different tongues that they use, though they may have different countries that the Europeans had cut up Africa now and given different names. He said, but we can speak of the unity of African culture. He wrote a thesis on it. The Europeans rejected it for the second time. So twice he wrote a thesis that they rejected. All right. Now, because his family back home had money, and because he had an uncle who also lived in France, who was very powerful in terms of having the businesses, so Diop decided to turn these rejected theses into books.
Good thing.
So he published books, pre-colonial Black Africa. And then the other one was the cultural unity of Black Africa in France. So now, once he published those rejected theses into books, they started selling all over Europe. So that means that there were professors, there were the African students who were studying over there who began to read these books. During colonial time, that he was this young student, not even a graduate yet, this young Senegalese student who have written these books that are coming from theses that have been rejected. Therefore, everybody now in Europe had an interest in finding out what is going on in Paris. Those two books became popular throughout these students who were studying all over Europe. To the point where, when he wrote his third thesis, now trying to connect Black Africa and ancient Egypt, which was what they usually call anathema, meaning something unheard of. In other words, you can't touch it. This young Senegalese scholar now wrote a book connecting Black Africa with ancient Egypt, saying that ancient Egypt was black. And now this time, when he was going to present his thesis, it became like a Super Bowl between a young African black student and the entire professorial group of this university, La Sorbonne. That's the highest and the best and the Ivy League university in France. So on the day when he was going to defend his thesis now, you had people that came from all over Europe. Africans, Europeans, who have heard of this Senegalese young man Now, remember, this is they're doing the colonial time. But who's challenging in Europe, in Paris, the Europeans, trying to tell them that what you've been teaching us is wrong. So, on that day, the people who were there, they recounted the story that the hall was packed. People were sitting down on the steps because there was no place to sit down. Some people were standing. So Diop started presenting his thesis on the connection between ancient Egypt and Black Africa. As he presented, his professors challenged him. As he presented, they challenged him. But when they challenged him, he came back with evidence, including pictures, that he got from their books. From their own books, for the people who have done research in Europe. And not only pictures, but also quotes from those people who had gone to Africa to explore, to look and to see and to speak and to what Egypt was. Now, this included people who traveled, scientists, some of them from Germany, some of them Russia, some of them from all over Europe. He even went into the history of the scriptures like the Bible to show connection between ancient Egypt and Black Africa. And people say that as he defended himself and he tried to destroy the arguments against him, the white people who had come to see how this black boy was going to be beaten down by all these professors, these white professors started leaving the hall one by one. And then when he would present a point that would destroy the argument of his professors, all these black students who were there, they would be like shouting like you watching a game. To the point where by the time he finished, the professors were so beaten down that the only thing they could say was, we can deny him his diploma. So they say, okay, we're going to give you your diploma with satisfactory. In other words, it was not an excellent job, we just give it to you. So it's okay. So they gave him his PhD, satisfactorily, not excellent, not very good. He said, at least I got my diploma, finally. But he was vindicated in the fact that the work that they rejected not only has become popular, but this work is going to make up the first book for him that will be published in the United States. I don't know if any of you have it, African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Anybody has that book? Okay. That's his first book. And now I'll advise you to try to get that book because this one, if you take it in this course, it's helpful, but this one is more complicated, more difficult than that one. Because African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, Mercer Cook, the brother who translated the book out of Washington, D.C., he took only the parts that didn't deal with science and math, like I did in this book. So it's easier to read, right? So, but the theses that were rejected became part of that first book, African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. So this is the Sheikh Anta Diop we're talking about. Now, earlier we were talking about it, I think with Brother Dry Bones, about how he died, and Sister Rose had asked the question. The French never forgot how this man had embarrassed them in their country.
That's right. Never forget.
They never forgot. So that when Senegal became independent, Léopold Sédar Senghor, another Senegalese that I told you, became president. Now, Léopold Sédar Senghor fell into that brainwashing that we talked about. So he became more French than the French themselves. To the point where Léopold Sédar Senghor became a member of what is called the French Academy, which is like the Supreme Court of French culture. In other words, every word in French that has to enter the dictionary, the French Academy has to approve that it's French enough. So this Senegalese brother, Senghor, became a member of the Supreme Court of the French culture. So when Senegal became independent, he went back, he became president, he says, the only way for Senegal to develop is to become French in our culture, in our language, in our thinking. And Diop, who had challenged the French, he didn't get a job in his country. Not only he didn't get a job, but the French made sure that he was banned from teaching even one class in elementary school. Until 1986 when he died. Cheikh Anta Diop, who wrote these books, who did the research in his own country, he could not teach one class. Not at the university level, not at the high school level, not the elementary school level. The French told him, you can only do your research. In your own country, remember that. You can only do research, publish if you want to, but you cannot teach a class in Senegal. So that's how he lived his life. Doing research, publishing outside, sometimes traveling, but never teaching Senegalese students. Why? Because the knowledge that this man uncovered was very dangerous. Why? Because it liberates you from mental slavery. I'm sure you've heard of those words. It frees you. It liberates you. So that's why they told him you could never teach. Now, I don't want to wait until Sister Rose asks her question, so I'm going to answer it right now. Because she asked a question because in one of the lectures on the video on the internet, I had said that we know that Cheikh Anta Diop was killed. So she wanted to know why. And I began to tell her that in 1984, Léopold Sédar Senghor was no longer president of Senegal. You had the younger generations that was coming. So, and Diop was now known throughout Senegal, even though he was not teaching. But the Senegalese people knew because the entire world was talking about Cheikh Anta Diop. Even though he wasn't teaching in Senegal, the entire Africa was speaking about this man, about his work, about what he has written. And so what he decided to do after he wrote this book, he said, this is my last book. Now I'm going to get into politics. I'm going to become president of Senegal because then I'll have the power to implement this knowledge throughout Senegal. And that the French could not tolerate. So, in '86, as he was preparing to start his campaign, they say he had a heart attack. He was not sick. Actually, he was getting ready to come to the United States because we were expecting him. They say he had a heart attack. And then, without doing an autopsy, the government took the body, took it to his village, went and buried it without doing an autopsy. So it goes without saying what happened. So that's why we know, because we know how these powers they work. So we know that he was silenced. Because what he was getting ready to do was a step that the French did not want to see done in Senegal. So this is a brief life of Cheikh Anta Diop. Now, as far as the book itself, the introduction, the book itself, if you have the book Civilization of Barbarism, I translated it It came out in 1991. And I tell you that just as the French government did not want this knowledge to come out, we went through the same thing here also in America. When this book came out, Civilization of Barbarism came out, during the early 90s, those who are old enough to remember, Black Studies Department, Black Studies was like all over the United States. Almost every university had a Black Studies Department. In New York City, we had one of the largest Black Studies department where I was working at City College. The City College of New York, part of the university system. The chairperson was Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Some of you might know about him. So he had the largest one with a body of professors and doing research and publishing and teaching. And when this book came out, and then Dr. Jeffries gave a speech on that in Buffalo, in Albany, it hit the waves like it woke up white folks and the establishment. And so, and they said they got to fire him. Actually, they fired him right away. So he went to court. He went to court because, hey, every university is supposed to be freedom of speech, academic freedom where ideas are discussed, where whatever theories you may have, whether it is crazy or not, you can talk about it. That's what universities are supposed to be. Why fire Jeffries? Well, he challenged them in court. He won the case. So he was reinstated. Now, who funds these, who gives the money for these departments?
That's right.
Right? So the next year, when it came time to decide on the budget for the universities, they said that there was no money for the Black Studies department. So the funds were cut, but because Dr. Jeffries was a tenured professor, they could not fire him. So they took him, the person, put him in the political department of City College. There was no longer Black Studies department. In fact, what I did was, as if I knew Sister Rose was going to ask me the question, I brought you, my brother, can you take a copy and pass it around? This is when you can see him holding Civilization of Barbarism when you get the page. And he was reinstated, but the following year they cut the funds, that's why they destroyed the Black Studies department. Again, why? Because the things that he spoke about, that are in this book that we're going to be discussing through this weekend, are things that can free our mind and can elevate us to a different level, can give us an understanding of who we are and what we did and what every other race on the face of the earth owes us. Owes us. And so those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about. But this is a sample. You can, they took this picture when he gave the lecture. And so he's holding the book because they knew this is what made him so dangerous, this book. So they put him up there on this, this is the Daily News. And you can see more than Civilization of Barbarism. So you can read that later. And in the study guide, those of you get the study guide, I showed the study guide, Sister Rose, you were outside, so you're going to get your copy. I'll go with your copy. But in the study guide, there's in the back of the study guide, I have an appendix of a book review that the New York Times did on this book. And they tried to destroy Diop, just like they tried to do it in France. But since Diop was not here, I responded to the New York Times. They never published my response. So what I did, I put it in the study guide in the book, so you can read it. Because we are in a battle. It is war, the war for our minds. Now, let's get to the introduction or in the book. And chapter 18, by the way, before I get to the introduction, which is going to take longer than chapter 18. Chapter 18, the last chapter, is a theory of language. All that it's saying that all these languages in the world come out of African languages. As we're going to see when we talk about the origin of humanity, that all the races come out of the black race. We're going to see it's what it's saying in chapter 18, that all the languages come out of African languages. And now you can see words in European languages, no matter what it is, that the roots of these languages are African languages. So you can retrace back their history, their origins, their etymology back to African languages.
Right, etymology.
All right? That's all that is for that chapter 18. It's very short. But it's just about, it's talking about languages that as we go along, we're going to talk, when we get to culture, we're going to talk about science, we're going to talk about the contribution of the Africans in all of these areas. We're going to be touching again on that, on the languages. But I just want you to know that chapter 18 is only a theory of Diop about the origin of languages. I want us to take a little time to talk about the introduction before we go on a break. Then when we come back, then we're going to do cultural identity. All right? I understand Sister Rose is going to have dinner for us.
7:30.
7:30, okay. So we have about 30 minutes. So because I want to spend some time with the introduction because it's very important. There are two introductions in the book. There's the forward that Dr. John Henry Clark wrote. Why Dr. John Henry Clark wrote it? Because without him, we wouldn't have known Sheikh Anta Diop in the United States. Dr. John Henry Clark went to Senegal to attend one of these symposiums on culture, on world culture. Yet, this thing being held in Senegal, in Dakar, Sheikh Anta Diop was not invited to be part of it. As much as he had written, he was not invited. So that Dr. Clark has to leave the symposium, walk down to the campus to Sheikh Anta Diop's lab where he did his research to talk to him. Because Dr. Clark had read some of the work that he had done. So that when he went to see him, he talked to him and said, well, we need this work translated in the United States. We don't have it in the United States. So Dr. Diop gave him permission that when he comes back to the United States, he can try to get somebody to translate some of the work. So that's why when Dr. Clark came back to the United States, he started looking for somebody who would try to translate Diop's work until he met Mercer Cook from Washington, D.C., who decided to translate the first book that I told you about, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. So that's how we in the United States came to discover Sheikh Anta Diop. So that when I was chosen to translate this book, Diop said that Dr. Clark should write the foreword in English to this book. So that's why you have that introduction. It says foreword on page where Roman number 13 by Dr. Clark. So this is what we get from Dr. Clark's introduction. Number one, it gives us a brief description of who Diop was and how important Diop was to black people all over the world. But not only that, Dr. Clark puts Diop in the context of the movement that was going throughout the world for black people to reclaim identity, reclaim who they are, and reclaim Africa. And if you read it, it's going to talk about Pan-African Congresses that not only that will be followed by W.E.B. Du Bois, but beginning with Marcus Garvey, when he proclaimed Africa for the Africans. And this movement, within this movement, Dr. Clark takes and puts Diop in there. And he says that therefore Diop is one who has put together the formula that we need. And if you look at that book, if you go to Roman page 50 on the top, I don't know if you know Roman numbers, it's a little X and a little V. Okay, on the top. That go to that page, a little X and a little V, that's 15 in Roman numbers. Alright? That paragraph begins, I first became aware, everybody has there? Is there?
Yes.
Okay, our sisters, Kibib is trying to find the page.
Got it.
Everybody's there?
15.
Okay. Roman number 15 on top. This is what he writes. He says, I first became aware of the writings of Sheikh Anta Diop in 1958 while reading the proceedings of the first and second conferences of Negro writers and artists. His work was a revelation to me. Dr. Clark writes. Why? He said, because I have not encountered in print an African scholar so forthright in challenging prevailing misconceptions about African history and in putting forth a new creative view with documentation. That's the importance of Diop, Dr. Clark says. Diop was, after he finished challenging the French in their country and won, he decided now to challenge the world of academia. He decided to challenge the misconceptions of history itself, as we are going to see this weekend. How was he able to do it? Because he was a multi-talented, who had multi-training in different areas, science, history, linguistics, the arts, philosophy, and therefore he could challenge the world in all these areas. And that's why we have this book. But this is why Dr. Clark called this book the Bible of Black history. Because it covers all the areas. And over the weekends, we're going to see every one of these areas. And beginning today with culture identity when we come back from the break. Now, what do we get from Diop's own introduction? So if you go to page 1, it says introduction. Diop, the second paragraph. On page 1, the second paragraph says, it's a further contribution to the work that allowed us to elevate the idea of a black Egypt to the level of an operational scientific concept. Now, there's a little story right there that I need to tell you. When I was translating this book, the publisher was a white man who published his first book. You can find sometimes a good white man sometimes. Once in a while. But now when I translate the book, usually when you're translating a book, a scientific book, you have to have an editor. who's going to check to make sure that what you're doing is correct. All right? You'll see most of the work that is published in the universities, they have the author and the editor. So we met in New York with the publisher. So he introduced me to an African-American brother from your place, Buffalo, from the university there, was going to try to be the editor, working with me. All right? So Dr. Clark was the overseer of the project. So I'll be in his house on 137th Street in Harlem. In the basement, we'll be talking, and then I'll be telling him what to do, what I'm doing. When I translated the introduction in chapter 1, I sent it to the editor to see how he's going to edit the book, and then send it back to me so I can see whether he's being true to my translation. And this was a brother, an expert in what is called Romance languages. Romance languages meaning that he knows about French, he knows about Spanish, he knows about Portuguese, he knows about Italian, and what's the old Italian language? Latin. Right. So that's why they call them Romance languages, because they are one family. So the brother was an expert in this. Now, after I sent him and he translated, and he edited those, sent them back to me. When I saw them, I hit the roof. I was angry. And I want to see the chairman of my department, Dr. Jeffries. I said, Dr. Jeffries, I cannot work with this brother. He said, what's the matter? He's a brother. I said, it's not about him being the brother. It's about what he's doing to what I translated. And Dr. Jeffries also knows French because he had studied in Ivory Coast. So when I showed him, he said, well, I'm not the overseer, you got to go and see Dr. John Henry Clark. So I went to see Dr. Clark at his house. I explained to him what was happening. He said, well, and I love Dr. Clark. He said, you the translator, you have the power to decide whether you want to work with this person or not. And I loved him for that. Because when I spoke with Diop, he was in Senegal, we spoke, he said, you are the one translating the book? I said, yes. He said, remember, this is my last book. If you're going to translate it, it has to be authentic to what I wrote. And you know why? That little sentence we just read, where he says, the idea of a black Egypt. Okay, black in French is noir. And I translated noir to black. This brother said we have to change it to be an African Egypt instead of a black Egypt. Any of you understand why? What is the matter with, instead of saying a black Egypt and saying an African Egypt? That was his argument, because it is in Africa. I said, brother, if Diop wanted to us to write about an African Egypt, he would have said African, because that's what African means in French. The man put black Egypt. Do you know why? That's what the danger is. Because white folks don't want people to know that ancient Egypt was black.
Right, that's it.
So if you put the word African, meaning what? It can be anything.
Anybody.
Especially right now, when Egypt has been occupied since the 7th century by Arabs. So therefore, if you say an African Egypt, instead of saying a black Egypt, all right, so it can go, right? So the Egyptians today can say, yeah, that's us. It's talking about us. We in Africa, we Egyptians. I had such a big argument with the brother on the phone, and he said, well, you know, if you don't want that, that's your problem. And maybe they will get another translator. And but what he did not know is that before I came to translate the book, I made first Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben and Professor Simmons, they used to work together at 125th. Then who sent me to meet Dr. Jeffries? But Dr. Ben had told me that they had been trying to find a translator, they couldn't. Nobody could translate it because the book was so complicated. So I knew that they're not going to find a translator, not right away anyway. So when he said that, I said, okay. I called the publisher, the white man I told you about. And I told him what happened. He said, that man is a scholar. He is an expert in Romanian languages. How are you going to say he does not know what he's doing? Well, if you don't do that, we'll find another translator. I said, fine. He said, okay, so if you don't give me another editor, you're not getting my translation. So he said, fine. I said, fine, okay. So we cut off the relationship. So I kept translating. I wouldn't send them my work. It took like 2 months. I think they tried to find somebody else. They couldn't find him. One day I get a call from the publisher. He said, well, I found you another editor. And check this out. It was a white man. But when I sent him the same thing, he edited it, he sent it back to me. He did his job without trying to change the words to mean something else. So that's how this book is so important. Because the things that they are put here are the things that we need to know, understand, and teach so that we can know who we are. That's why he started with that the idea of a black Egypt become an operational scientific concept. What does that mean? It means that right now, if you study literature, you can use black Egypt as a foundation, which means that what you're going to study as where it comes from you as a black person. That's what is called an operational scientific concept. You studying the arts. You can go to ancient Egypt, as we're going to find out, because we invented all these things. But that ancient Egypt is black. And therefore, you're going to see yourself as the originator of that, what you're trying to study. So it becomes an operational scientific concept, something that we can use to study anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Whether it is music, whether it is religion, whether it is philosophy, you can go to that idea. And we're going to find out why, because this is the oldest civilization in the world. Everybody has tried to claim that it belongs to them. That's why when Diop challenged them, and he won that battle in France, and now he was trying to preach it all over the world, though they're fighting him. But he said in this book that is his contribution, that he has made the idea of a black Egypt into an operational scientific concept that we can use, right? And he talks about there are great philosophers, and we're going to find out who not only went to Egypt, but they praised ancient Egypt. Okay, but if you go down to the paragraph, the fourth paragraph says, since then, the line of ill-intentioned Egyptologists,
church rule.
okay, ill-intentioned Egyptologists, in other words, they're experts, but they're experts in doing evil.
That's right.
Experts in teaching you the wrong stuff. Ill-intentioned Egyptologists, what did they do? The French equipped you with ferocious erudition. What is ferocious? In other words, they have knowledge, but it's so ferocious. The intent of this knowledge is to destroy. To destroy, not to build up. Brothers and sisters, when we go to these schools and they teach us about that we are inferior, that white folks invented this and that, as we're going to find out, they're killing us. They're killing us. Ferocious. Have committed the well-known crime against science. Crime. It's a crime. It's a crime to teach somebody. It's a crime to teach somebody wrong stuff about themselves. It is a crime. It is a crime. By becoming guilty of a deliberate falsification of the history of humanity. Brothers and sisters, I'm here not to talk about the history of black people, not black history. Our history is the history of humanity. Alright? That's the essence of Diop. I went to speak when the book came, they invited me at Temple University to speak at the Black Studies Department. And Temple at that time was pushing the idea of Afrocentricity. Right? And one of the students asked me the question about that. And I said, Diop is not an Afrocentric. Diop is teaching us about the history of the universe. Because see, when you say Afrocentric, you're putting him in a box. The man is talking about the history of the universe. So when he said they changed the history of humanity, meaning what? The history of the whole world. That's what we are. As we're going to find out, because we gave birth to the whole world. That's why we can't put him in a box. Now, so what happened to us? Go to the last paragraph of that on that page 1. The last paragraph. Thus, imperialism, right? Brother Drybone, we were talking about imperialism, right?
That's right.
Thus, imperialism, like the prehistoric hunter, first killed the being spiritually and culturally before trying to eliminate it physically. That's what happened to us. Before they enslaved us physically, what they did first to destroy us spiritually and culturally. Spiritually and culturally. Right? Before eliminating us physically. How did they do that? The negation, go to the next page. The negation of the history and intellectual accomplishments of black Africans was cultural, mental murder, which preceded and paved the way for their genocide, for our genocide, here on the continent and there in the diaspora in the world. So brothers and sisters, I was telling Nana that if you go to Ghana, they don't treat you like a Ghanaian. Remember, the killing was not done here only. They started in Africa. They killed us first spiritually and culturally before trying to kill us physically. So that's why today, brothers and sisters, you go on the continent of Africa, Africans there, for the most part, want to be more Europeans than the Europeans themselves. Even today. Even today in independent Africa. The brothers and the sisters on the continent want to be more Europeans than the Europeans.
Low self-esteem.
That's number one. The same thing we are here. So please don't look at somebody coming from the continent because they say I'm coming from the Congo or from this, that they know what they're talking about when it comes to Africa. You might know more than them. Everybody sitting here today, you know more about what it is to be an African than somebody coming from the continent. Because they, like us here, where we have been all destroyed. That's why Diop they couldn't let Diop teach a class in Senegal. Because we have been destroyed. That destruction that murder, he's calling it murder. It's murder. To dehumanize people. It's murder to brainwash them, to make them feel inferior. It's murder. So this is why, brothers and sisters, we're doing this class. Because Diop, what he has put here, as he said, is because first of all you understand we have been killed. We have been destroyed. We have been murdered. We are walking with PhDs, with master degrees, with I don't know, religious degrees, whatever degrees you want to call it. But up here, we did.
It's our bones.
Up here, we are dead.
That's why we drive on.
Right? Because of this knowledge. Because they have killed us spiritually and culturally. And therefore, everything we do. I gave one example one day in New York, and a brother, one of the brother scholars, got upset with me because I said that we have been killed spiritually and culturally. When the police kill us in the United States, what do? Nothing. No matter what they do to us, no matter how they kill us, no matter how they shoot us, we don't do anything. Diop says why? Because before they destroyed us physically, first they destroyed us culturally and spiritually. In the Congo right now, 8 million people have died. Blacks killing blacks for the sake of Europeans so they can get the resources, the minerals. What is happening? Nothing. Ask me, Thursday, today's Friday, Wednesday, I was at Temple University speaking on the genocide in the Congo. They asked me the question, what happened? Why nobody's saying anything about it? Why should somebody say about it? If the African Union, they have one thing called an African Union, is supposed to bring all these independent black countries. The student asked the question about African Union. I say African Union is impotent. African Union cannot do anything because all these leaders, all of them are dead up here. They're corrupt, and therefore they don't take the life of Africans as dear to them, as sacred as the life of the Europeans. And I'm going to give you an example, then we're going to go on a break. The lady said we had 10 minutes. In the Congo, it's the worst place today in Eastern Congo. It's the worst place today for you to be a woman or a little girl. Because they gang rape them. One every minute. Gang rape, destroy them. If I showed you something was happening to the Congolese women, you would not be able to even eat. But guess what? Nobody's doing anything. The African Union is not doing anything about it. Why? Again, Diop said what? We've been destroyed up here. But, check this out. A white woman can leave the United States or Europe, go to the part where they're gang raping all these black women and little girls, go in a jungle, do research, go all over the place, come out, nobody touches her. No one touches her. Where these same people who have been gang raping little girls, black little girls in Africa, they will not touch that white woman. She'll go and come to the United States and go to Europe and make a video. I went to see, this is what I saw. You have to understand that based on this what we just read. Because white is supposed to be sacred. That's how they brainwashed us.
Status.
Therefore, nobody touches her. So, that's why the first lecture we're going to have when we come back is going to be cultural identity. Because without cultural identity, you are nobody. That's why Diop says we were killed first what? Spiritually and culturally. See, once they destroy you culturally, that's it. They don't need to do anything else. So we're walking around, we think we are somebody. We're walking around with brains of white folks. Their culture's guiding us, but in a way where it is detrimental to us. It's wrong for us. And so this is what even today, as we speak today, this is the work that we need to do. if we really need to, if you dead, for you to become alive, what do they call it?
Resurrect.
Resurrection.
Resurrect.
We're going to talk about resurrection.
That's right.
Right? We're going to talk about resurrection.
Yeah, we have to speak this.
Because see, if Job says we've been murdered, then for us to come back alive, we need resurrection.
Absolutely.
And that resurrection can only take place through knowledge. Through knowledge. That's what we're going to talk about when we come back. Thank you very much. Any question about what we just talked about? The introduction and beyond. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about theory.
Yes.
Was it a theory or a fact?
No. A theory, in doing research, you have a theory, then you have to prove it.
Right.
That's right. So what he did, he took that theory and brought the facts to support that hypothesis. And therefore, when they challenged him, he presented the evidence that what he was talking about was true, because in fact, the Europeans are the ones that did research and the evidence there. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm probably misled, but how old is the Egyptian culture? I mean, how far do we go back?
Depending on whose book
Who's
are you
writing the
reading.
book? The reason why I ask, because I have artifacts that are 5,000 years old from Nigeria.
Mhm.
And, you know, we talk about Egypt with 3,000 years. And with
Egyptian culture is older than Nigerian culture, than any other black culture. Ancient Egyptian culture is older than anything, anywhere in the world, including China, India, and all over the place.
it's good to know that.
Because in Egypt, we're going to talk about it, in Egypt is where black people built that knowledge to the highest level.
And then it's great.
Even though human beings came out of Central Africa,
Right,
right?
right.
And then we migrated all over the world. But ancient Egypt, that's why Diop talks about the idea of the Black Egypt.
Right, okay.
Yes, sir.
Isn't Sheikh also an archaeologist? And
Archaeologist, anthropologist.
Right.
Yes. Any other questions?
I was just interested in asking what motivated him to think outside of that French box.
Mhm.
Because when you stand alone, it's very difficult to keep preaching the truth, and nobody's hearing.
Yes. I think, sister, I can actually testify to that. It's something that you've come with from where you're coming from. His family, I told you that his family was a family that was very proud of who they were as Africans. It's a royal family that didn't believe in being inferior to anyone, white, black, red, or yellow. So he had that sense of self. I'll give you a quick example of myself. When I came to America, I started out in Louisiana, at Louisiana State University. When I got there, white folks embraced me and gave me a white host family. And the white host family that I got, of course, started teaching me, right? Don't go with these Negroes here. They don't like you. The Negroes here, they're no good. They don't like you. You follow me? But I knew better. Because where I was coming from, my father had taught me about our history and how white folks used to come to catch people with guns, with weapons. So I knew that anybody who looks like me is me.
That's right.
I ain't gonna tell me that they don't like me and they look like me and you don't look like me. Do you like me?
Tell you something like that.
So I quit that host family. So, but you have to have some background where you know what you want. Yes, brother, you got a question? Brother Nathaniel, you have a question? No. You got everything? Yeah. All right. Yes.
I just wanted to add something too, because in looking at history, I find that the man with the full stomach can intellectualize, he can go forward. And the leaders, if you examine how history is. It's the people who had the full stomach, the security, the royal family, etc., who could go outside of the box. Whereas the other man, the other people, they're so busy trying to survive.
Okay, yeah, but in their case, Leopold Selassie Lord was also from a royal family.
Yeah.
But he did not, you
Not
know,
everybody.
Yeah, not everybody. That's why. So
Yeah, right,
it depends on, again, the culture. Where you're coming from, what do you have? What is guiding you as a principal? Okay, sister?
It's dinner time, and we're on a tight schedule tonight. So at least no later than about 10 minutes after 8, we need to be back in here, and the class leaves at, the class ends at 10. Now, what I'd like to do is get the Honorable Tony. Dee, will you escort him out, please? I want to get Tony out first.
Yeah.
Let's get him out the room first. And Nana, Dr. Ngemi, will you all go in first? I'm sitting them at different tables. I'm sitting these guests at different tables. So if you want to speak with them, you'll be able to speak with them.